Hello guys, and welcome back to Joe's Ventures. And today we're doing part 123 of our Planet Zoo mod spotlights. Of course, let me see through that. So this is, of course, we go through some of the wonderful mods people have been making and use them to talk about some of the wonderful biodiversity that we share our world with. So today we've got a few new remasters. Got a couple cool new animals, especially one related to the Oceania pack. And really awesomely, we've got two extinct animals, which I know you always love to come see. So let's have a look at these guys. So we're going to be starting off today. This is the one was done by Leaf and Monsoon. So there's an older mod that got like a near complete remaster. We'll just click on it so it'll make life easier. So we've got the green peafowl. Look at this wonderful guy. So completely remastered by Monsoon and makes it look so much better. You can see how much it's improved. But anyway, these are the green peafowl or Indonesian peafowl. These guys are found in Southeast Asia and Indochina around like forests and stuff. Also the national bird in Myanmar. With some population in Cambodia and Vietnam, things like that. They are sadly considered endangered, as we'll get into. And the reason they're a very desired bird for people like aviculturists that like to have birds, but they are relatively high maintenance compared to the common peafowl or the Indian blue peafowl, which is a lot easier to care for than these guys. So the main differences for they get from the Indian peafowl are these guys are quite similar in appearance though, but they can see a lot more greenish on their colors there, and that long tail, tail feathers, they get about 2 meters long. Those big tail feathers that they use, fan out to attract mates. And other than the breeding season, however, the male's train is molted, and that you can distinguish between the sexes. It can be a little bit difficult unless they observe quite closely. And they've got highly iridescent green feathers there that almost look like dragon scales, which are really, really cool. And like blue around that, and they also have a little bit of like a plume up here. Oh, and that kind of gives them really interesting colors with a little bit of blue on there. Lots of iridescence, so they make a lot of their colors or show off a lot of their colors through iridescence. But you can see there's blacks and blues and grays. Very, very colorful bird. And you can see that from a distance. In terms of they tend to be a lot more silent than these peafowl, and the males will announce their parent presence though, and the males of some subspecies will do a loud call that's very similar to that, like in Indian peafowl, but yeah, really cool. And they're also quite large. These guys are the largest among the largest living galliforms, and they can get to terms of overall size, though lightly built, they're like comparable to a turkey. So greenfowl are perhaps the longest extant bird from beak to tail because they can get 1.83 meters or 5 feet to 9 feet or 6 to 9 feet or so when including the tail. But it itself measures like the tail itself can measure itself like 1.4 to 1.6 meters. So that long tail kind of covert or its feathers, also called the train, can get quite big. And it's actually even longer than those of the male Indian peafowl, but shorter than those of Argus pheasants. So it's really, really interesting in that regard. Yeah, really cool bird. Dark primaries. They have those shafted crests that have like those little blue bits at the top, and facial skin's whitish blue. Really, really interesting plumage for these guys. We'll have a look. That's enough of the male. We'll have a look at the female. So you can see the female's not actually that different in that regard, but really cool. So these guys are found widely throughout Southeast Asia. They can be found in China, Yunnan, and northeastern India, and Myanmar, and Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, and even Java in Indonesia. And there have been other reports of them, records of living in them in northeast India, though they could be feral or because of hunting, they could have got rid of them. But they typically like a variety of habitats. They can be found in primary and secondary forests, both tropical and subtropical, as well as evergreens, also savannas, farmland edges, things like that. So they they live in a variety of habitats, but do like to be near water. So there's been some stuff about the taxonomy. They were first classified as Parvo munictus originally, but there's been other like subspecies and stuff like the Javan peafowl, the Indo-Chinese, and the Burmese peafowl. So different subspecies living in different areas, but of course that's subspecies. It seems to be like other races and things. Most recent genetic stuff kind of propose that there are some different subspecies or populations within them, and the divergence between the green and the Indian peafowl occurred about 3 million years ago. So quite a young split, and yeah, really interesting. In terms of their behavior and ecology, these guys are a forest bird. As I mentioned, they like to hang around the forest, and they lay between 3 to 6 eggs. And we'll have a look at the cute little babies. We'll talk about them. They've been widely believed that these guys are polygamous, so they a male mate multiple females, or vice versa. But unlike the Indian peafowl, males are solitary and do not display in leks, but instead they are highly territorial and form harems, so a male will have a bunch of females and doesn't pair bond with them. However, this theory actually conflicts with what's been observed in captivity, and they've actually been observed in captivity to be strongly monogamous, which is a close similarity between both sexes, also suggests a different breeding season in contrast to the Indian peafowl. So it's kind of a debate whether they are polygamous, like having harems and stuff like that, defending a territory, or they're actually monogamous, which is really interesting. But in terms of their habitat, these guys like to spend their time in or near the ground or in tall grasses. And family units will roost in trees like at the heights of 10 to 15 meters. And their diets will vary a lot. They'll eat all sorts of invertebrates, fruits, frogs, reptiles, just basically anything small enough. Very omnivorous diet. They'll also feed on termites and things like that. Flower petals, berries, and leaves are quite favorite foods for adult peafowl. But in terms of their status, these guys, due to hunting and habitat destruction, like a lot of species in their habitat, they've been evaluated as endangered and they're rapidly declining. The population has been estimated to be about 5,000 to 10,000 individuals in 1995. But in some areas, they're quite low. There's like the population in the Kura-Sinana Wildlife Sanctuary is believed to be less than 1,000. And although their natural range doesn't really overlap with the Indian peafowl, there are worries about hybridization, especially in captivity, that could create these like hybrids and pollute the gene pool. It's not the big issue, but that doesn't seem to be too big an issue since their ranges don't. It's mainly if wild animals get out, really. And there have been reintroductions to try and help basically reintroduce different subspecies and things, which have been controversial, but seems to be doing okay. And in terms of cultural significance, they're actually quite often depicted in Japanese paintings. And although the Burmese or grey peacock pheasant is a national bird in Myanmar, the green peafowl is actually kind of the ancient symbol for the monarchs of Burma, which is really, really interesting. We're back when it was Burma and not Myanmar. Be a really, really cool animal. How can you not love this? And I love that a lot of people are going back to remaster a lot of these wonderful birds and wonderful mods. So yeah, really, really awesome. So next up, this next one's really cool because it's not only this was done by Leafworm on Super. The next one's done by Narwhal. This is kind of both a remaster and a new species. So this one here is a really cool animal. Let's have a look at you. So this is kind of his remaster of North Island brown kiwi, but instead of making it just another North Island brown kiwi, this is the great spotted kiwi, which is another species of kiwi. Because as I've mentioned before, there are 5 species of kiwi. So this is Narwhal making. Narwhal has made the great spotted kiwi, also known as the great grey kiwi or the Aurora. I believe you say that. These are a species of kiwi only found in the South Island of New Zealand, so they can only be found around the west coast at the moment, though I believe they're much higher range into prehistory or historically. So these guys are ratite, very much like other kiwis. They can't fly, all that good stuff. And these guys are doing a little bit better than a lot of other kiwis. These guys are vulnerable because their habitat's quite mountainous, and that doesn't allow a lot of introduced predators to get in them quite as well as like more lowland habitats. So they seem to be holding out a little better than a few other species of kiwi. And it's believed to be less than 16,000 in the wild, almost all living around Nelson and things like that. But it sucks. So as I mentioned, there's also the largest type of kiwi. So these are one of the 5 species of kiwi living in New Zealand, and these are the largest one. Though there are some like Stewart Island, South Island brown kiwis, or Tokariro, to say that. Those are slightly larger on average, but on average, these are the biggest kiwi. And they're most likely related to the little spotted kiwi, everyone's favorite little guy. And these guys, and in terms of kiwis' relations, they're actually more closely related to elephant birds. So it's believed to be that elephant birds and kiwis were kind of an independent radiation of ratites out into the world as they settled in New Zealand and Madagascar independently as their ancestors were flighted. And we actually have a prehistoric kiwi with wings, which is really interesting. But yeah, as I mentioned, one thing as well is that in 2001, it's actually found that the holotype of the this kiwi, the great spotted kiwi, was actually a hybrid of a Raui kiwi, which is another brown kiwi, and a little spotted kiwi. So it's like, which is quite interesting. So it needs to kind of be redescribed in that regard. And its name comes from no wing, which is Apteryx, it's its genus name, and Haasti is the Latin form of Sir Julian von Haast, who named the Haast eagle, things like that. in honor of his famous works, which is interesting. So, in terms of description, these guys are mentioned. Larger species of kiwi. Males are about 45 centimeters tall, with females being about 50, with bill length ranging from 9 to 12 centimeters, with their little nostrils at the end there. And weight ranges from between 1.2 to 2.6 kilograms, or 2 to 5.7 pounds for males, and 1.5 to 3.3, or 3.3 to 7.3 pounds in females. And you see that long beak there, that big round pear shape that they've got going on. They also have the whiskers. They have very small eyes, very similar to the kiwi since they're nocturnal. Short feet, things like that. Its vibrissae is kind of what the bird version of whiskers are called. The vibrissae is kind of their name. They have plumage, as you can see, that's very interesting. That gives the impression of spots. You can see it's almost like mottled pattern there, which is really interesting. And they don't have a tail. They only have a short pygostyle. They also lack keels because they don't have all the big flying muscles that a lot of other birds have. And they have powerful legs that they can use to kick and all that. So really, really cool. Just a kiwi. And anatomically, other than the color, they're not too different from other types of kiwi. And they also have a low body temperature compared to other birds. And also, they are quite long-lived. So we have kiwis living regularly into their 50s and 60s. It's more generally accepted like 30 to 40, but there is kiwis that are probably well into their 60s. It's just not as much published on them. But yeah, really, really cool. So these guys are once numerous across the South Island, but due to predation, they're now restricted in a few places. So like the Buller Range, the Paparoa Range, and Arthur's Pass are places that they've kind of remained their strongholds since they are less vulnerable to predators there. And they tend to reside in complex maze-like burrows that they make, and there can be up to 50 burrows in one bird's territory. They'll often move around and things like that. And bird's nest fungus can sometimes grow in these burrows, but they kind of live in all sorts of different habitats, forests, tussock grasslands. They can be found in pasture as well, which is quite interesting. Like other kiwis, they are nocturnal, so if they live in an area lacking predators, they will come out during the day, but typically they come out at night, so they come out to feed. They have a good sense of smell, which is quite usual for birds. They'll have a hectare, and males are fiercely territorial, and at most there'll be 4 or 5 kiwis living within a square kilometre. They can have a range of about 62 acres, or about 25 hectares, and they'll obviously change with size and things like that. And they will chase and fight off intruders, and then they'll often use growls and hisses and bill snapping to try and get rid of them as well, which is quite interesting. So in terms of breeding and nesting, these guys are monogamous, so these have pairings that can last up to 20 years. They nest in burrows. So the breeding season begins in June and ends in March, where the food is plentiful. They reach sexual maturity about 18 months in captivity, while females are able to lay after 3 years. And in the wild, sexual maturity is between 3 and 5, depending on like how good area they are to find food. And great spotted kiwis will chase females until the males will chase the females until the females either run off or they mate. And the pairs mate for about 2 to 3 times during peak activity. So once they've mated, the gestation period is about a month. So females do not sit on the egg, but they will have this huge egg that they lay. Kiwis are quite famous for their huge eggs. They keep it in their body and takes up a huge yolk, about 65% of the egg. And it has the largest egg in proportion to its body out of any bird. And then once it lays it, she goes off, and then the male stuck sitting on it and raising the baby. But because of the baby's large size, basically does not really need to eat much after it's born, and it's basically ready to go right out of the eggs. So it's a really interesting survival strategy, especially for an animal like that. So they're quite precocial. So after it lays the eggs, the female will guard it and sit on it, and then the kiwi tick will take 2 to 3 days to hatch, and they are actually abandoned by their parents after hatching. So after 10 days, the chicks will kind of go out and do their own thing, which is quite interesting. And they reach their full size at about 6 years of age. And in terms of their feeding, very similar to other kiwis, they dig around for earthworms and grubs, but they'll feed on wetters and caterpillars and slugs and all sorts of little things. And to find prey, what they'll do is they'll stick their beak into soil, feel around for vibrations and things, also with their hairs as well, and then back into the ground and grab it out, and even use their claws to dig things out, which is really cool. And they also, like most birds, will swallow small stones that aid with digestion. And in terms of survival, they're quite large and powerful, so adult animals can easily defend themselves against stoats and things, and which are quite invasive, though adults uh, adults can be killed by dogs. And stoat ferrets possums will feed on the eggs and chicks, which means that most chicks will actually die within their first few months of life. So basically, Operation Nest Egg and things like that, they work more with New Zealand brown kiwi, but they try to take eggs from the wild and raise them in captivity until they're big enough to release, so they can defend themselves against stoats and things. Because that's basically all the times. It's really hard for a young kiwi to get past that point because of all the predators around. But these guys would have most likely been nocturnal originally because of predators like Haas Eagle and Eros Harrier and Swamp Harriers, things like that. That would have been a predator for them. But in terms of status, they were declining when European settlers came, and it was believed to be about 12 million great spotted kiwis living in New Zealand, estimated about that time. But because of birds, invasive pigs, dogs, ferrets, and stoats, they have a 5% successful rate of like egg turning into an adult. And they have more an advantage because of their high altitude habitat, though. But there has been some big declines. So over the past 50 years, since there's been a 90% decline in 1990, also logging's been a bit of issue, hunting for their feathers. But now they're basically considered vulnerable. They're doing better than a lot of other kiwis, but they are quite vulnerable still. They also there's estimated in 2000 about 22,000 adults remaining, and is believed to be now less than 16,000. And there have been movements to try and protect the habitat, obviously predator free 2050 to get rid of pests, also putting them on islands and things. And there have been efforts at showing that poisoning and intensive trapping has actually raised their kind of successful rate or uh, placement rate is up to 60% now. So their fledgling rate from babies to go to a baby to an adult is like 60% now instead of 5. So it's really helping a lot of these guys. So pest control and all that, ongoing pest control is very important to help the survival of these cool guys. Yeah, really, really awesome animal. Narwhal really did a wonderful job. So, next up, we have got another cool animal. We've got a cool little one here. We got the Indian crested porcupine done by Lorby. So, Lorby's come back with a few really cool mods. So, this is a really cool one. So, there's the Indian crested porcupine. So, not too dissimilar from other porcupines. They are a large rodent. They can get between 11 to 18 kilograms, or about 24 to 40 pounds. And from nose to the base of the tail, about 70 to 90 centimeters, 29 inches. And their lifespan is typically about 30 years. So they're not too dissimilar from other species of like old world porcupines. A bit smaller than the Cape porcupine, but a bit bigger than I think the African crested. So very interesting in the middle. And very much like other porcupines, they have all these quills and on their backs that they can use to defend themselves. That get up to about 15 to 30 centimeters, or about 5 to 18, 11 inches. And they also have some on their tail that are hollow that they can rattle, so it's a way to defend themselves, which is really, really cool. And the Indian porcupine, these guys live around Afghanistan, Armenia, China, Yemen, Sri Lanka, India, all those areas. So basically those kind of areas. And they're quite flexible with their environments. They prefer rocky hillsides, but they can be found in scrublands, both tropical and temperate, plantations, gardens, grasslands, things like that. But their range seems to be limited by seasonal densities of forage and places to burrow. So that seems to be a legit limiting factor. And more specifically, actually, the northern part of their range is actually limited by the minimum summer night duration. So they do not actually come out. They do not occur above latitudes where there's less than 7 hours of daylight, which is actually a big thing for these guys as well, which is interesting. But in terms of their behavior, very similar to most other species of porcupines, they have a very broad and mostly herbivorous diet. So they have a variety of they consume a variety of natural and agricultural plant materials. So they feed on roots, bulbs, grains, dupes, and tubers, also invertebrates and small vertebrates, things like that. And because they are cecal digesters, so they basically have a cecum, which is a big organ where they store a lot of bacteria and stuff, and they basically the hindgut fermenters. So they're able to absorb a lot from low quality food, so they're just able to get that quantity to make up for the quality, because they poor quality food, but they can eat a lot of it. And they also are able to chew on bones to get minerals, very similar to other species of porcupine, and that can help with the quill growth. And they also can form substantial fat reserves that allow them to help in habitats where there can be seasonal fluctuations. So they can put on a bit of fat. And they also can act as sustainable substantial habitat modifiers by eating lots of tubers and things. And they're also considered quite serious agricultural pests in all of their range. And they're often considered nuisance, which is a little bit sad. But they're considered least concern, so they're not doing too bad. In terms of reproduction, I didn't put the babies in here because the babies don't have a model. The Indian crescent porcupines will typically mate from February and March, with gestation lasting about 240 days. A female will give birth to one brood of 2 to 4 offspring, and the young are born with their eyes open and their soft quills. They quickly harden after they are born because you don't want to hurt the mother's insides. Typically, young will be born at about 13 to 19 weeks after birth, but remain in the den with parents and siblings until sexual maturity at about 2 years of age. And actually been reported that Indian crested porcupines are usually monogamous and they mate every night throughout its life. Not only for reproduction, but to like have that pair bond. So basically, they are very amorous lovers, you could say, and that kind of bolsters that relationship as well. And that has only been found in bonobos, dolphins, and people. So that's a very interesting behavior that for this animal to have. And because of its wide variety of habitats and stuff it can live in, it's considered least concerned by the IUCN. While their populations are stable or not severely fragmented, their populations vary as well. They're often considered a pest, though things like urbanization, infrastructure, pesticides is kind of destroying their habitats. But they are doing quite well. They are protected, so definitely doing okay. And a really cool mod by Lorby. I love little Lorby mods. Really, really awesome guy. So that's Lorby there. Next one, we've got another one. So this is going to be another remake, but this was done by Narwhal as well. Leaf Jen and Narwhal remade the black buck. So how can you not love a good black buck? So black bucks, also known as Indian antelopes, these guys are native to India and Nepal. Really, really cool animals. So in terms of their characteristics, these guys are moderately sized antelopes. So they're not that closely related to a lot of other antelope species. They're most closely related. They're own their own group. So there's like black buck, and then there's all the like Cuvier's, rim sand antelopes, so specs antelopes. So they're quite different in that regard. But yeah, moderately sized. They stand to about 74 to 84 centimeters, or about 29 to 33 inches tall. And a head to body length about 120 centimeters, or about 47 inches. There is a population in Texas that gets average about 38 kilograms and 20 to 57 kilograms, which is interesting. And you can see there's quite prominent sexual dimorphism. Males are quite a bit darker, and also the females are quite a bit lighter with these large horns. The females don't have those large horns, and they can measure between 35 to 75 centimeters, or the maximum record in Texas is about 58 centimeters. The India one's quite a bit bigger. And you can see they get their name black buck from that dark coat, and they also got counter shading there. They got quite light undersides and some light bits around their muzzle and their face there. The females are a lot lighter on that regard, and there have been albino ones kind of present as well, which is quite interesting. And there's two subspecies. There's the southeastern and northwestern black bucks, not too different from each other, mainly different ways, kind of like the breeding season. They could be independent species, but I don't know if there's anything much in that regard to talk about. But yeah, these guys are native to the Indian subcontinent, but they are extinct locally in Pakistan and Bangladesh. And Nepal, the last surviving black buck populations inhabit kind of the black buck conservation area south of the Burrowing National Park. So they are like extinct in some parts of their range, but overall they're still doing quite well. Some reintroductions could be in place for these guys. They typically like to live in grassy plains and thinly forest areas where there's lots of water, and because they need to drink daily. And there are some introduced populations into Argentina. There's a population that's about 8,000. Australia, there are some potential populations. They've been introduced in a few places. In the United States, they live in Texas, and the Texas population is actually estimated to be about 35,000 animals. So that's quite interesting. So these are animals, because people like hunting them, they've been introduced to a lot of places. And in terms of ecology, these guys are diurnal, so they're typically found less active at noon with the summer temperatures, but typically active during the day. And group size will fluctuate quite a lot because they have a fusion fission society. So some herds will join up and then kind of move over and do things, and it is always very constant. As they take more resources, some may split off, So it's very thing. Also, they'll adopt lekking as a strategy to gather females for mating. So territories will be established by a male on the basis of the local distribution of female groups. And the size can be between 1.2 to 12 hectares, or about like 3 to 30 acres. And they use their pineal gland and glands to kind of mark this territory. And in terms of lekking, they'll kind of fight each other, or not quote unquote fight each other. They can attempt mating with visiting females, but they typically will fight each other and have injuries because they will fight over females, of course. And they're also severely affected by lots of calamities such as floods and droughts, and can take up to 5 years to recover from these things. Also, they get hunted by wolves and all sorts of other animals, which is also quite interesting. In terms of their diet, these guys are herbivores, and they are typically grazers, but will occasionally browse. They prefer kind of sedges and live oak things as well in the Colossian deserts, so they tend to like those kind of grasses, things like that. They're like quite healthy grasses as well. And as I mentioned, they need to drink water daily. In terms of reproduction, find the little calves or little babies that we talk about them. Little baby black bucks. So they reach sexual maturity about the age of 8 months, but they mate no earlier than 2 years. So males mature at the age of 1.5 years, and mating will take place throughout the year, with peaks occurring during spring and fall in Texas. Two peaks have been observed in India, so August to October and from March to April tend to be the two peaks of mating. Rutting males will aggressively establish their territories and kind of fight each other as well, and they will thrust their neck and kind of fight each other and raise their tail. And the dominant male will actually pursue as the female with a nose and kind of smell the urine to see if she's ready to go, you could say. And then they mate, of course. In terms of gestation, the gestation lasts about 6 months, where a single little calf like this guy's born. And newborns, as you can see, are light yellow, with infant may have a black patch on their neck. So they're quite precocial, so they're pretty much just able to stand on their own after birth. Females can mate again after a month of nutrition as well, so basically after that. And juveniles remain active and play throughout the day. And juvenile males will get their adult black colors at about 3 years of age. And then their lifespan is actually quite long. They can live for about 10 to 15 years. Look at the male here. So in terms of threats, these guys have declined sharply because of excessive hunting, deforestation, and habitat degradation. And they have been killed illegally, but now they're basically considered protected now. And there's some places where they're quite common. But some they have become locally extinct in some areas, but like as I mentioned, Bangladesh and Pakistan. But they are doing okay in that regard, and also quite common in culture as well. The antelope has been a source of food for the Indus Valley, and also has been associated with a lot of Hindu mythologies as well, as they draw chariots for like Lord Krishna, things like that. So yeah, really, really cool animals. How can you not love these wonderful antelopes? And nice to get a remaster animal that definitely, probably the Gen one was pretty awesome, but Narwhala's kind of gone through and really updated it to make it fit the more recent updates for the game. So that's really, really cool. Definitely a big fan of that. So next up, we are going to move on to another really cool animal. So we're moving on from, we're going to do another antelope. This one is by Leaf and Bongo Hardwood. We have got here the lesser kudu. So look at this wonderful guy, a really awesome mod. And Bongo Hardwood is a zookeeper in real life and actually works with kudu. So that's really, really awesome. So the lesser kudu, these guys are a medium-sized bushland antelope that can be found in Eastern Africa, and they're related to animals like the greater kudu, the bongo, elands, nyala, things like that. So yeah, really, really cool animals. They are more closely related to nyala, actually, than like a greater kudu. So they look very similar, but they're actually very distantly related, which is really interesting. And they are considered what is a spiral-horned antelope. So their head to body length typically between 110 to 140 centimeters, or about 43 to 55 inches, with males reaching about 95 to 105, or 37 to 41 inches at the shoulder, while females a little bit smaller, about 90 to 100, or about 35 to 39. And males will weigh between 92 and 108 kilograms, about 203 to 238 pounds, with females being 56 to 70 kilograms, about 123 to 124 pounds. And they have quite distinct sexual dimorphism, as mentioned. The males are quite bigger than the female, and the females as well, the juveniles, will have a much more reddish coat, while these guys have got that much more darker, grayish coat with the stripes. And they typically will get that at about 2 years of age. One long stripe also around the back there, and they've got these long white stripes along their back there, and like light legs and things like that, and some white patches as well. So it's really, really cool. And these horns here are only really present on males. So the spiral horns get between 50 to 70 centimeters, or about 20 to 28 inches, and about 2.5 twists, 2 to 2.5 twists in them. And the base circumference is about 156 centimeters as well, which is quite interesting. I think that's right. That must be millimeters. And these slender horns can be dark brown and can be tipped with white. And the males will start developing these horns at about 6 to 8 months, but they reach their full length at about 3 years of age. So let's have a look at the ecology and behavior. So let's find a female, and we'll talk about that. So the lesser kudu, they're mainly active at night or during dawn, but as they like to kind of seek shelter in dense thickets just after sunrise, they can camouflage quite well because of their shape and stuff. That's called counter shading. It's quite interesting. And they spend most of their time in the midday, especially they'll be foraging, standing, lying around, or roaming around. And they can actually move readily through dense vegetation, which could be to protect them as well, and can be quite good leapers. So they can make multiple leaps up to 2 meters high, which is quite interesting. And they're quite gregarious in nature, especially the females, so there's no distinct leader or hierarchy in their social structure, with fights being uncommon and no territorial behavior. But when fighting, male lesser kudus will kind of lock their horns and try pushing each other, and mutual grooming is hardly observed. But unlike most, females can actually become closely associated for several years, and 1 to 3 females along with their offspring may actually form small groups. So they may form small groups, and juveniles, males, will leave their mothers at about 1.5 years and may form pairs. So they're a little bit more social than a lot of other species of these kinds here, of the spiral antelope. However, about age to 4 to 5 years, males will live alone. Females may live in small groups by themselves. And they typically do not associate with other animals, except when they are feeding in the same area. As diets, these guys are pure browsers, but they tend to forage on trees and herbs and things like that. They'll eat flowers and things, but typically they will feed on trees and shrubs. They're mostly browsers and feed on creepers, things like that. And the lesser kudu, they'll browse primarily either at dusk or dawn or at night, and is sometimes associated with gunnuk and impala, which is quite interesting. And they may actually compete with the gunnuk with evergreen species in the dry season. However, the lesser kudu actually do not prefer acacia, and they do not stand on their hind limbs while feeding, so it's a little bit of like ecology, things like that. And they also can live in arid environments, as they do not have that much of a reliance on water, and they can eat succulent plants when water is not available. And in terms of reproduction, both males and females are sexually mature at about 1.5 years. However, older males may actually mate. They might not actually mate until 4 or 5 years old as they start to establish themselves. And they are most reproductive till this age at about 14 to 18 years. And they have been recorded actually lactating about 14 years of age. They don't have a fixed breeding season, so they can typically breed all throughout the year. We'll have a look at this cute little baby. They typically breed throughout the year. But there have been some peaks, like 55% of births take place around September to December. And a rutting male will actually test the urine of the female to see if it's an estrus, and then they'll obviously mate. Typically, gestation period is about 7 to 8 months, with a single calf being born. The female will isolate herself from the herd and kind of give birth away from them. And the newborn calf will weigh about 4 to 7 kilograms. And about 50% of their calves will die within the first 5 months, with only 25% surviving 3 years, which is a little bit sad, but it could be because of white mule disease, deficiencies, and things like that can be acquired. That's part of the reason why they have such a high mortality. And the mother will hide her calf when she goes off to feed, things like that, and then she returns to suckle her young. She then checks the calf identity by sniffing its rump or neck, and in the first month they may actually occur for 8 minutes suckling, but they kind of do that. Really, really cool little guys. So habitat and distribution. These guys typically inhabit a lot of dry bushland regions, so they're like acacia trees and things like that, and thorn bushes in semi-arid areas around northeastern Africa. They can be found in woodlands, things like that, and generally found in altitudes lower. They have been reported near Mount Kilimanjaro, which is quite interesting. And they don't have huge home ranges. Typical home range for those can be average about 2 kilometers for males and 1.8 for females. So not huge ones. They're also native to Ethiopia, Kenya, South Sudan, Tanzania, Somalia, and Uganda, but extinct in Djibouti, which is a little bit sad. They're largely confined to the Horn of Africa today. They believe to have lived down in the Ethiopia and Somalia, things like that, historically. And there's also evidence of them living in the Arabian Peninsula from an individual shot there, as well as recent analyses from like Holocene rocks that may have lived around the Arabian Peninsula historically, or to like around the Holocene, or potentially even in the Ice Ages, as like obviously a lot of changes in their ranges happens, but we don't really know too much about that. In terms of their threats, I believe these guys are actually considered near threatened, so they're not the least concerned, but there are some issues. They're quite shy, and their ability to camouflage actually protects them a lot from poaching, and they are widespread in a lot of places where people are. However, there's rhino pest outbreaks These guys can be quite susceptible to that. And human settlements and loss of habitat, of course, can be a really bad issue for these guys, as that helps decline their numbers. Uh, the total population of kudus is estimated to be about, or lesser kudus, about 118,000, but has been decreasing, with a decrease of about 20% over the last 2 decades, which is why they're considered near threatened. But luckily, they're still quite common, and they have become kind of a symbol, things like that. And typically, they have a population density of about 1 per kilometer, and it really exceeds that. But they are doing okay in that regard. They are near threatened, so it's not a huge decline, but it's something obviously to worry about a little bit if they are declining. It could get much worse with more climate change to bring in more diseases, since they seem to be quite susceptible to diseases. So yeah, really, really cool animal. Lesser kudu. You can see the female there. Yeah, really, really awesome. So that was done by Bongo Hardwood. Love Bongo Hardwood. Nice to see a keeper playing with this game as I'm studying to be a keeper. Really, really awesome. And next up, we have got a couple of extinct animals. So these next two are done by Scott, and we love Scott. Scott has kind of done a lot of reptiles and stuff, but he's moving on to a lot of extinct animals, which is really, really cool. So let's have a look at one. So this is Oblon. So these guys are an extinct monotreme that are related to the platypus that lived during the late Oligocene to the late Miocene. So there's 3 species described. I believe that's Scholdy. Let me check. So this is... Yeah, that's Sokuldi. That's the species at this one here. And they seem to be much similar to their modern relative to platypus, pretty much the same anatomy, except adults retain their molar teeth. That's their main difference, so they would have been probably better at eating smaller prey or more hard prey. Let's have a look at you while we talk about you, which is quite interesting. So it was first described in 1971 in Australia. And the holotype for this guy was found in 1975, which means persistent tooth. So it means it has the permanent teeth, unlike modern platypus. That's where they get the name from. The second species, Dickinsoni, is also called the River Schley platypus. It was found in the famous River Schley Formation, which has all sorts of really interesting prehistoric Australian animals from the Oligocene. River Schley has different types of thylacines, all sorts of really cool animals. And then you have the third species. I think Domionis comes from River Schley. I may be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it comes from River Schley. And the third species, which is the second species and also the largest species. So this one comes from River Schley as well, but it is larger. So this was discovered in 2012 at the Two Trees site and was dated to the Miocene, about 4.4 million years ago. So it's a little bit younger. So it may have actually lived in the Pliocene, so it may be quite a bit younger than the River Schley one that's originally found. That would have been potentially like a Miocene. This one's like really late Miocene and potentially even Pliocene. So yeah, really, really cool guy. But yeah, description, they're not too much different from the modern platypus that they mainly have in sizes, things like that. In gens are thought to be quite similar, but except they've got their teeth. Dickinsoni comes from Dicksoni, which comes from the River Schley fauna. These guys inhabited kind of these pools and wetlands that lived in the rainforest and fire in River Schley. Though unlike the modern ones, they were quite large and retained their molars into adulthood and had a spoon-shaped one. But this is the species we're talking about here. That's Sokuldi. These guys were very, very similar to the modern platypus in anatomy, but were larger and actually got bigger and lived in the late Miocene, about 10, as we mentioned, about 4 or 5 million years ago. And the wear patterns on their teeth actually suggest that they were adapted for crushing, and they potentially fed on much more hard-shelled animals compared to other species of, obviously, like Odorodon and also modern platypus. They've been feeding on much harder foods. And they may have actually been feeding on turtles as an example. So turtles, potentially hard-shelled like clams and things like that. Freshwater mussels, I believe that could be very much, even turtles, very much could be their possibility. And they are thought to have habited freshwater and fed on a variety of animal prey. The species diet is thought to be crustacea, like those considered the modern platypus, though there were larger species available to its greater size. The potential prey from the River Schley fauna include like frogs, turtles, fish, and lungfish that have been found on the Two Trees site. And this species was unknown in the later fossil record at the time of discovery, and it defied the assumption of a single platypus-like lineage that lost its teeth and became smaller in size. So originally thought it was kind of like platypuses got smaller, lost their teeth. These guys kind of bucked that trend because they were still quite late. These guys would have been in the end of the Miocene, potentially Pliocene, only about 4 or 5 million years ago, or 4 or 5 million years ago is probably the best way to put it. And they still had their big teeth and had a different ecology than more modern platypuses, which is quite interesting. Yeah, really, really cool animal. Definitely love this one done by Scott. Love the colors. He really made it more distinct and interesting. Really love it. And who can you not love paleo animals? And first mod for the platypus. Really, really do love these guys. And cool that they got 3 species, but this one's the most recent one, found in 2013 at the Two Trees site, dated to the Miocene. Really, really awesome. And one thing as well, the specific name for the Dasokuldi actually is not chosen in honor of an indigenous Australian creation story name for the platypus, where there was a duck named Tharakul, I believe say that to build a chimeric creature to build the platypus after being ravaged by a roriki, which is actually a type of water rat that lives in Australia. So basically, it's a chimera of animals. He put it together. The duck kind of put it together, gave birth to it. So that's quite interesting. Really, really awesome. Cool mod. Love an extinct animal. I love an excuse talking about extinct animals. Except for the cute little baby, little friend. How can you not love this little guy? All right, moving on. Next up, we have got, last but certainly not least, we've got everyone's favorite big bad reptile, favorite big prehistoric monitor lizard. We have got Megalania. So really, really cool animal here. So Megalania, these guys are an extinct species of giant monitor lizard that were part of the big megafaunal assemblage during the Pleistocene in Australia, and were the largest terrestrial lizards known, being estimated between 3.5 and 7 meters, and weighing between 97 and just under 2 tons. It's a really, really huge animal. So first discovered by Sir Richard Owen in 1859, was first given the name Megalania prisca, which means ancient great roamer. But eventually it was just lumped into Varanus because it is related to monitor lizards. Its closest living relative, I believe, is the Komodo dragon or lace monitors as well. Kind of in that group, so in Varanus. And a lot of people are talking about splitting Varanus as well, which I agree. But they are closely related to like lace monitors, Komodo dragons, things like that. And in terms of size, what really makes it interesting, in terms of phylogeny, it is affinity with parenti has also been mentioned, school morphology, but it's considered today to be sister to the Komodo dragon, so basically its closest relative, with its closest living relative in Australia being the lace monitor, and it's firstly it's actually the parenti is more closely related to golden argus monitors, which is quite interesting. In terms of its size, there's been no complete fossil found, but there have been some. There's been some estimates placing them at about 7 meters long and about 600 kilograms. But in 2002, it was greatly downsized, about 4.5 meters and even like 331 kilograms. Most recent estimates, I think, put it at about most recent estimates about 5.5 meters, 18 feet long, and about 575 kilograms. So basically, around the same size as a large male saltwater crocodile. That's probably the best way to put it. But there's, of course, different variations, things like that. The biggest estimates put about like 7.9 or 26 feet long, and even up to 7 meters is if you give it like a very Komodo dragon like body plan. Because it probably was because similar to Ecology. So if you give it that, it's probably about 7 meters long, or 7.3 meters long, and would have weighed potentially up to 2 tons, with a leaner 320 or 710 pounds being average. So yeah, like a quarter-ton megalizard this is probably the most accurate size. I believe mostly we'll go with like saltwater crocodile, male saltwater crocodile size is the most like general, like best comparison, I think. And if you guys have seen big male saltwater crocodiles, we've got a couple at the zoo that I'm studying at. They're enormous. I love them though. They're so cool. But anyway, let's talk about their ecology, things like that. So these are the largest terrestrial lizard known to have existed. And though mosasaurs, of course, would have got larger, but they lived in the Cretaceous and lived in the ocean, so they wouldn't have met. Judging by their size, though, they would have fed on all sorts of big animals. Like, even you look at Komodo dragons today, they'll feed on buffaloes and deer and things like that. These guys are believed to have fed on giant marsupials, like Diprotodon and Procoptodon, but also things like smaller reptiles and small mammals, potentially like kangaroos and things like that. Large birds like Ginornis would have been one as well, having a large skull, complete with large teeth, and a heavily built body, well adapted for killing large prey. And some scientists as well remain skeptical that these guys were the only predator. They also know that there's the marsupial lion, which would be in competition for these guys. Also, Quicklania, which was a terrestrial crocodile that lived around in the same time of Australia. It got to about 6 meters long, so potentially about the same size, and was present until 40,000 years ago. Would have actually potentially competed with Megalania. And its closest living relative, also known to evolve in Australia before spreading out to Indonesia. That's why we think it's a sister species with Komodo dragons. So basically, the ancestors of Komodos and Megalania would have spread out, and then Megalania would have evolved in Australia, and Komodo dragons would have evolved in Australia, and then moved out to other places, like obviously Flores, which they live now. But the closest relatives I mentioned here. There has been a study actually looking at the speed estimates of how fast they could run. There's estimates between 9 to 10 kilometers an hour, which is actually comparable to a saltwater crocodile, which is only like a third the size, which is really interesting. And in terms of venom, like other varanid lizards, such as Komodo dragons and our monitors, they belong in the group Toxicophora, which are united by their ability to produce toxic creating oral glands, and animals such as iguanas, snakes, and things like that have them. Closely related to venanids like Komodo dragons and stuff like that. It was originally believed to be bacteria in their teeth, but it turns out it actually is a true venom. So these guys would have had a venom most likely to help them hunt those bigger animals. So it would have been an anticoagulant and a hemotoxin as well. So these would have made them any wounds that they inflict kind of make them bleed a lot more, which is another thing as well. And they would have also increased their breathing, and also would have led to shock, so it would have made them bleed more and all that. And if this is actually true, if these guys had venom in the same way Komodo dragons did, this would have made them the largest venomous animal known, which is really interesting. And in terms of extinction, so the youngest specimens that we have of these guys date to about the late Pleistocene, with the youngest remains being about 50,000 years old in central Queensland. And there's actually studies looking at the related extant varanid lizards and then comparing them to the Vipriscus. Actually showed that these guys would have actually been more likely to be inefficient when attempting to outrun human settlers. So they very likely could have been killed by people. There's big evidence of things like climate change in Australia during that time. Most likely would have wiped out a lot of large animals before humans came. But then Megalania would have still been alive by then. And then all the changes like with the fires and hunting by humans would have essentially drove their numbers down. And there have been some people talking about animals like a woolwoi, which is a aboriginal kind of prehistoric monster, which is believed to could be based on Megalania and passed down through folklore. But main reason they probably went extinct, climate change and people, very much the same reason why most other Pleistocene megafauna like the mammoths and the diprotodonts and all the cool Ice Age animals that we all know and love, the ground sloths, they all went extinct, was because of climate change and people, or some combination of those factors, potentially disease as well. But some combination of those factors. Be a really, really cool animal. We'll have a look at the baby, because the baby's so cute. How can I look at these little babies? I love the colors on these guys. They've come out so wonderfully. Scott is like the CEO of reptiles, and he does reptiles so well. But I love he's branching out and trying to do extinct animals, which is really cool. And there's two versions of the skin. I picked this one because I liked it more than the other one. The other one's like basically a Komodo dragon with some extra patterns on it, which is cool, and it's cool for like basic reasons. Like it's basic, it's cool, it's got some cool patterns on it. It's probably the most realistic. But I was just finishing, like as you see, playing Far Cry Primal, all the Far Cry games. It's a bit of a Far Cry kick, and then they released this as kind of inspired by the Blood Dragon, which is a rare animal. In Far Cry 3, it's a rare Komodo dragon that has a red head from all the blood that it's kind of eating. It's a rare animal, and you use it for crafting. So really, really cool that he added that, and I thought I had to show this off because Far Cry mood, playing Far Cry Primal, and I prefer this one over the original skin. The other, as I mentioned, the original skin is kind of just basically a Komodo dragon with a couple extra patterns on it, and I know he's doing other ones, so I'll probably have to come back and cover them again, but I love this one. I think this is my favorite. So Scott did a wonderful job with these guys. Also, like Leaf, Narwhal, Bongo Hardwood with the kudu. Really, really awesome job, everyone. Really, really awesome. So, yeah, I really hope you guys enjoyed part 123 or 123. Got a couple more parts to come. I know we all love some more mod spotlights. Some really interesting mods that are coming, which I'm really excited to talk about. So, yeah, I really, really, really hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Hope you guys like and subscribe. Always remember to click the little bell icon to get notified about anything. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, hope you guys like and subscribe, and bye-bye.